Hi, guys. Time for another segment of the Word in 10. And today I want to talk to you about Jesus, who's the first and the last, the beginning and the end. And a simple question. There were two on the road to Emmaus in Luke chapter 24. And they were going along talking about everything that took place of Jesus, from his crucifixion to his death, his burial, the resurrection, and all the things he did in his ministry for 3.5 years. And Jesus came alongside them, and they were prevented from recognizing him until they made it to their house and they had Jesus come in, and Jesus broke bread, and then their eyes were open and they recognized him. My question is this: do you recognize Jesus? Because Jesus told them that they needed to understand all the law and the prophets had to say about Jesus had to be fulfilled. And then he expounded, he explained to them everything the law and the prophets said about him. Imagine that Bible study. So, the question I'm going to ask you: do you recognize Jesus in the Old Testament? That was their Bible. And the scriptures, they didn't recognize him. They were hoping that this was the Lord to come, not realizing they were watching Bible prophecy fulfilled before their eyes. So the question is, do you recognize Jesus? Do you know who he really is and how they saw him in the Old Testament? Not just in typology, which is a very good study in itself, but Jesus walked with them. Jesus spoke with them in the Old Testament. Now, that's a little unsettling for a lot of people who don't recognize Jesus Christ as the Lord of glory. They do lip service or just in their minds, but they really don't see that in their hearts. They don't realize what John said in the gospel in chapter 1, that he said nothing was made that was not made by him. All of creation. Jesus was there. When you heard, let there be light, Jesus was the one who was there in the garden walking with Adam and Eve. It was Jesus who walked with Moses. Jesus, who's the shepherd of Israel, leading Israel through the wilderness. It was Jesus, Paul said, that he was there. He was the rock, and so on. So, what I'm going to do for the next few minutes is just read passages from the New Testament and how the New Testament writers understood their Bible, which is our Old Testament. Listen to how they saw Jesus, and they mention it. So I'm going to read to you starting from Proverbs 30, verse 4 in the Old Testament, just as an introduction. And it was a question they were being asked centuries before Jesus was born of a virgin. Listen to what Proverbs chapter 30 says. Who has gone up to heaven and come down? Who has gathered up the wind? Who has wrapped up the waters in a cloak? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name? And what is the name of his son? Surely you know. Talking about God's son in Proverbs 30. Do you know? They saw Jesus many times. Now, they didn't know his name was Jesus. Many of them never knew that this was the Messiah talking to them. But still, listen as I go on now from New Testament passages. In John's Gospel, chapter 5, Jesus, who is confronting the Pharisees' misinterpretation of the scriptures, in which they couldn't handle him because Jesus is the scriptures personified. He is the fulfillment of the scriptures. So he talks to them and he says in John chapter 5, verses 39 and 40, listen to this. He says, you search the scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life. Now listen to what he tells the Pharisees. But it is they, the scriptures, that bear witness about me. Yet you refuse to come to me that you may have life. Could you imagine that? Jesus told them that these scholars were searching the scriptures and they didn't even recognize that they were talking about him. And they refused to believe the scriptures. These are scholars. They refused to believe the scriptures that they might come to him and have life. They were infuriated, not realizing they were misinterpreting the scriptures. They thought he meant something else. And many of them thought that. In fact, His own disciples said to him, Jesus, are you now going to restore the kingdom to Israel? They thought that when Jesus returned as the Messiah, they thought he was going to set up the kingdom. And many do that now. They didn't realize he was going to suffer and die and rise from the dead. They didn't see all that in the scriptures, and yet it was prophesied. David prophesied it in Psalm 22. And they didn't know that. But there's a lot of Christians today who don't realize that when Jesus comes, it's not to set up his kingdom. He set up his kingdom 2,000 years ago. When he comes, he's coming as the judge to judge the living and the dead. So you need to understand that. Now, listen to this. This is in John chapter 12. Listen to what Jesus says here. He says, for this reason, John writes, they could not believe because, as Isaiah said elsewhere, he has blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts, so that they can neither see with their eyes nor understand with their hearts, nor turn, that I would heal them. Verse 41 in Isaiah. This is because he saw Jesus' glory and spoke about him. Think about that. Think about that. This is Jesus explaining in John chapter 12. He himself says, I'm going to read it again, verse 41, chapter 12. Jesus says about Isaiah, Isaiah said this because he saw Jesus' glory and spoke about him. Think about that. This is the writers in the New Testament saying that Isaiah saw Jesus and prophesied about him. There's no way around it. You can't get around this. Listen to the Apostle Paul writing to the Corinthian church in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and wanting them to understand. Listen to what he says. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 1 through 4. For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud and that they all passed through the sea. Verse 2, they were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food, drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. Paul said that. He said the rock was Christ. He said that spiritual rock followed them. In fact, I'll go one step further than that, and you'll see this all through the New Testament, and you'll see the Psalms bear this out, that the shepherd of Israel led them. Who's the shepherd of Israel? We know it's Jesus. Jesus is the good shepherd. And the shepherd of Israel, who is Jesus, led his own people through the wilderness for 40 years. It was Jesus who led the Israelites out of Egypt. A lot of people don't want to hear that. But listen to these two passages, and it'll help you understand that. The writer of Hebrews, chapter 11, verses 24 to 26, says this. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasure of sin. Verse 26 in Hebrews chapter 11, listen to this. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. Here it says that he was esteeming the disgrace of Christ greater than the pleasures of sin, which was fleeting, and the disgrace of Christ to him was more than all the treasures of Egypt. And in case we needed even more, and I'm going to close out with this, our time's away from us already. Jude chapter 1, verse 5, Jude writes, now he's the half-brother of Jesus, he said, I wanted to remind you, although once you fully knew it, that Jesus, who saved the people out of the land of Egypt, afterwards destroyed those who did not believe. Now, many translations say the Lord, but that word is kurios. Kurios in the Greek, And it literally means supreme controller, owner, master, and Lord. Who's master and Lord? It's Jesus. A few of the earliest manuscripts actually they had the boldness and the bravery to translate it the way it should have been translated. Jesus led them out of Egypt. So there are times away from us, but I have to ask you, do you recognize Jesus in the Old Testament? Go back and study. He appears in all the books of the Bible. I'm telling you that Abraham saw him, Moses saw him, all the patriarchs saw him, the prophets saw him. So I pray that you see him, even more so today, being saved by grace. Until next time, learn to recognize Jesus everywhere in his creation. God bless you. See you again.